Time can make even simple questions great unsolved mysteries, as important information that was once common knowledge becomes unknown. But with enough research and clues into the past, these historic or ancient mysteries can be solved. Number 10. In March of 1672, a convoy of Dutch ships was sailing through the English Channel when they were attacked in an ambush. The incident led to 4 merchant ships being captured and 1 warship sinking. It was the spark that ignited the Third Anglo-Dutch War, but the final resting place of the sunken ship was forgotten to history. In 2023, that mystery was finally solved. The solution began 10 years earlier when a survey team noticed an anomaly on the sea floor off the coast of Eastbourne in the English Channel. It was marked but not investigated at the time. In 2019, a group of divers decided to check out the site. Normally, these anomalies turn out to be nothing unusual, but on this occasion, the divers found something astonishing. Stone slabs were lying on the ocean floor. Nearby, heavy metal cannons have been scattered away from the damaged wreck of a wooden ship. It was immediately clear this was an old vessel. It was quickly marked for protection by the authorities, and divers and historians got to work trying to put a name to the mysterious wreck. The cannons were a significant help. The bronze and iron artifacts had markings indicating they'd been for the Dutch Admiralty. One had a marking of 2 crossed anchors and the initials PPP, which in Dutch means I fight for the fatherland. The discovery that this was a Dutch ship led to British investigation teams working with Dutch historians to find a name for the ship. Analysis of wooden boards that were used in the ship's construction helped to date the vessel to the 1600s, while other artifacts found on board helped to narrow down the candidates. After years of putting the pieces together, the investigative team announced that they had solved the mystery. This was the Klein Hollandia, the vessel that had sunk in the action of the 12th of March, 1672. The Klein Hollandia was commissioned in 1656, just in time for the Second Anglo-Dutch War. The ship could hold 56 cannons and was an important part of the Dutch Navy. Every major sea battle of the war featured the Klein Hollandia as one of the combatants. Neither the English nor the Dutch were able to get any decisive victories during the war, though many ships were lost. The Klein Hollandia suffered significant damage, but managed to survive the war. After the Treaty of Breda was signed and peacetime resumed, the Klein Hollandia served to escort merchant ships as they traveled between the Netherlands and the Mediterranean. It was on one of these missions, years after the end of the Second Anglo-Dutch War, that it came under attack again. The ship was part of a convoy of 66 merchant vessels and 5 warships that were on their way back from trading in the Mediterranean. Even though the Klein Hollandia wasn't a merchant ship, it still had a heavy cargo of expensive Italian marble that it was bringing home. As they passed the Isle of Wight, the ships came under attack from a small English fleet. The commander of the English fleet asked the Dutch commander to come aboard his ship. When he refused, the English opened fire on the Dutch vessels. A battle commenced, during which the Dutch commander lost his life. After 2 days of fighting, 5 ships were captured, including the Klein Hollandia, but the warship was badly damaged. With both Dutch and English sailors on board, she sank off the coast of Eastbourne, where she would remain undisturbed until the wreck was discovered more than 350 years later. Number 9. In 2017, road improvement works near Cambridge, England, uncovered the remains of an individual who passed away 2,000 years earlier. He had no grave goods, and no one else was buried in the location. Who this man had been was a mystery that had an answer stranger than investigators expected. The skeleton was given the name Alfred Clooney, named after a nearby village. He was found in a rural area, which would have been even more rural at the time when he lived, between 126 and 228 CE. The man had been buried in a ditch without any grave goods, and apparently without much ceremony. When he was first discovered, investigators speculated he may have been a farmer who lived in the area during Roman times and was buried on the property. Experts extracted DNA from the skeleton to try to get to the bottom of the mystery. Over thousands of years since Alfred Clooney passed away, much of his DNA had deteriorated, but genetic material could still be found in an inner ear bone. This DNA was then compared to other Roman Britain-era remains, and the remains of other people from the time period. It quickly became clear that Alfred Clooney wasn't a typical resident. He wasn't a Briton or one of the Roman settlers. His DNA most closely matched a group of people called the Sarmatians. These people were a nomadic group that lived in what is today southern Russia, Armenia, and Ukraine. They were on the very eastern edges of the Roman Empire, the complete opposite end of the empire to Britain. It was a shocking discovery, not least of all because this was the first Sarmatian from the Roman era ever discovered in Britain. DNA alone couldn't answer when the individual had been born. It was possible both his parents were Sarmatians, but had traveled to England before Alfred Clooney was born. To find out more about the man, scientists tested his tooth enamel. By looking at isotopes in the enamel, scientists could determine what sorts of food he'd been eating at various points in his life and where he had lived. The analysis showed that Alfred Clooney's diet changed a lot over his life. Until the age of about 6, he ate primarily millet and sorghum grains, C4 crops which mostly grew in regions where Sarmatians were known to live. As he grew older, his diet changed. The C4 crops were phased out, and he ate grains more commonly found in Europe. This proved he'd migrated west as a child. Unfortunately, there wasn't much more the analysis could tell us about who Alfred Clooney was. The fact that no other Sarmatian remains have ever been discovered, and he had no grave goods, makes it difficult to determine much more about his life. After defeating a Sarmatian army in 175, Emperor Marcus Aurelius absorbed the army into his own and sent Sarmatians around the Roman Empire. It's believed about 5,500 were sent to England, about as far away from their homeland as was possible, yet still within the Roman Empire. This was during the period when Alfred Clooney is estimated to have lived. It's believed that the boy may have been a relative of one of these soldiers and traveled to Britain with them. Number 8. Thousands of years ago, a mysterious kingdom in Anatolia was under attack. Civil war racked the Hittite Empire, and multiple cities were destroyed. In the city of Buklukale, a religious ceremony was recorded on a clay tablet, in the hopes it would help bring a swift end to the war. In 2023, the tablet was discovered, giving archaeologists valuable insight into the lost kingdom. The Hittite Empire ruled an area of Anatolia between 1650 and 1180 BC. It was one of the most important kingdoms in the Bronze Age, and often went head-to-head with the Egyptian Empire to the south. Despite its importance, the empire remains somewhat mysterious to modern researchers. The Hittite language, and others spoken in the empire, went extinct after the Bronze Age collapse, when the empire itself ceased to exist. It wasn't until the 1930s that the Hittite language was deciphered, and other minor languages in the kingdom remained unknown for even longer. The Hittite capital was Hattusa, which wasn't the only important city. Buklukale was a strategic location in ancient times. In the Middle Bronze Age, the river marked the edge of the Hittite kingdom. When Buklukale became absorbed into the kingdom, it became an important part of the frontier, a military city where the army could defend against the outside world. Fragments of clay tablets have been found by archaeologists for years, but there was never enough to properly gain insight into what life was like in Buklukale when it was occupied. In 2023, a valuable discovery was made. The clay tablet was roughly palm-sized and covered in the small wedged-shaped impressions of cuneiform writing. After deciphering the script, researchers realized the text was in 2 different languages. The first 6 lines were written in Hittite. When translated, they read 4 cities, including the capital, Hattusa, are in danger. The rest of the text was written in Hurrian, an even more mysterious language that still isn't completely understood. The Hurrian text was a prayer to the Hurrian storm god. In ancient times, it was often believed that gods from other areas had to be spoken to in the language of that culture. The prayer lists the names of enemy kings, talks about problems with communicating with the gods, and asks for divine advice and victory. The discovery changed the way historians thought about Buklukale. The description of a religious ceremony suggests that the Hittite king and queen would have been in the city to perform the rituals. It's possible there was a royal residence in the city itself, making the area far more important than archaeologists initially thought. The tablet was dated to between 1380 and 1370 BC. The destruction of the 4 cities described in the text wasn't part of the infamous Bronze Age collapse. Instead, this was a civil war, which has been described in other texts. The fighting was so fierce that even the Egyptian kings wrote about it and believed the kingdom was near collapse. Number 7. Natural curiosity is one of the best ways for previously hidden unsolved mysteries to be uncovered. Sometimes it's impossible to know there's even a mystery to be solved until someone looks closer and asks why something is the way it is. Following this curiosity to the answer to the mystery helps to reveal more about ourselves or the planet we live on. Scientists in Japan stumbled across one of these unsolved mysteries in a quarry of the island of Hokkaido. The Shimon Nakagawa Quarry is a sand quarry located near the town of Nakagawa, which itself is known for its fossil deposits. Scientists were collecting rocks from the quarry when they noticed something unusual. Deep in the layers of sedimentary rock, created on the ocean floor, were layers of amber. Amber is formed when resin produced by trees hardens and is fossilized. The sticky resin is produced by trees to trap insects or animals that might damage the plant. As soon as the sticky substance meets the air, it begins to harden, but the process usually takes about a week. It then takes millions of years to become fossilized amber. Amber will typically form on land. While it's not unusual for rocks to be swept into the sea and buried under layers of other deposits, for an entire layer of amber to be found was extremely unusual. When scientists examined the amber more closely, the mystery only deepened. The scientists looked at the amber through fluorescent imaging, which made the small particles easier to make out. The imaging showed the rocks had solidified in flame-like shapes. This happens when the amber is stressed or manipulated while hardening. Something happened very quickly early on in the amber's formation. Not only that, but it happened to a lot of ambers all at once. It was a strange mystery, one that happened deep in prehistory while dinosaurs were still roaming the earth. But when scientists realized what they were looking at, the truth was quickly unraveled. The amber layer was evidence of a tsunami that happened hundreds of thousands of years ago. Hokkaido, like the rest of Japan, sits on the Pacific Ring of Fire, a tectonically active area where the Pacific Plate is being pushed under the surrounding plates. Earthquakes and landslides aren't uncommon. Unfortunately, neither are tsunamis. Tsunamis are typically formed when the seafloor shifts or when a landslide disturbs the water. At the coast, the ocean draws away from the land, creating an eerie sight as previously underwater land is left exposed. The water then forms a giant wall as it rushes back onto land, often penetrating deep inland and leaving devastation in its wake. As the water recedes again, it drags back debris into the ocean. Today, that debris is typically man-made objects. Hundreds of thousands of years ago, it was rocks and trees. According to scientists, a tsunami hit Hokkaido hundreds of thousands of years ago. A large number of trees were dragged into the ocean, with resin on their branches still hardening. The movement forced the resin into the flame-like shapes seen by the scientists. It was then deposited on the sea floor and buried under layers and layers of sand until the sedimentary rocks formed around them. Later geological activity pushed the seafloor back up to form dry land, which would eventually be quarried. This would be one of the earliest prehistoric tsunamis that scientists have physical proof for. The nature of the natural disasters makes them hard to spot on the geological record, or to distinguish from cyclones or storms. But this time, scientists were even able to point to the culprit behind the tsunami, a massive landslide just a few hundred kilometers away. Number 6. According to legend, Japanese shogun Yoshinori Ashikaga made a strange discovery while visiting a temple in Nara in 1429. After cutting away a piece of wood, he found the mummified remains of a dragon, which had apparently been dried out by the sun. In 2025, historians and scientists were finally able to solve the mystery of exactly what the shogun had found. The dragon mummy was housed in the Shosuin repository, along with countless other relics from Japanese history. The repository had been called the world's oldest museum and contains artistic artifacts from across the Silk Road, as well as internal Japanese documents. The treasure is now housed in a specially designed building, with the items on display being changed regularly so that nothing is damaged by being exposed to the light for too long. Many of the items housed in the repository are somewhat mysterious, and the dragon, or Koryu, is one of these. According to ancient texts, Yoshinori Ashikaga discovered a dragon in 1429. He was visiting the Todaiji Temple in Nara and cut off a piece of Ranjatai agar wood, a treasured piece of aromatic wood from China. After cutting the wood, he discovered a strange object, which he believed resembled a dragon, which had been dried out by the sun. The dragon was taken as a treasure, and it was assumed to be added to the repository. Ever since modern investigations into the Shosuin treasures began, historians and scientists have wanted to solve the mystery of what the Koryu actually was. In the 1950s, it was speculated that the animal might have been a Japanese marten, a weasel-like animal. This guess was based mostly on the creature's teeth. It wasn't possible to properly look beyond the surface of the mummified remains. In 2025, new research into many of the animal artifacts was conducted. Artifacts that were believed to be ivory or reindeer antlers were shown to be the remnants of other animals. Other mummies believed to be dragons were actually proved to be birds, but the Koryu was the most mysterious. According to legend, ever since the dragon was added to the treasure, whenever the repository was opened, it would start to rain. Coincidentally, rain also caused problems for the investigative team. On the day when they were supposed to travel to the site to inspect the mummy, heavy rain meant the bullet train was canceled. The team eventually made it to the mummy and began their work. X-rays were taken of the mummy, and it was also subjected to radiocarbon dating. This was the first time anything in the repository had been dated in this way. The X-rays showed that this was a marten. It was likely an adult female, roughly 40 centimeters in length. The animal was missing its front legs, which made it somewhat resemble a typical Japanese dragon. The dating techniques found it originated between the mid-11th and mid-12th centuries, around the time when renovation work was taking place at the temple. Number 5. In archaeology, it's rare for there to be one discovery that solves a historic mystery. Instead, discoveries are more like puzzle pieces that come together to form a whole answer. But even if they don't provide the whole answer, there are still some discoveries that change our understanding of the mystery from the past. In 2019, archaeologists made one such discovery. The team of researchers were working on the Konya Plain in Turkey. There have been many archaeological discoveries in various parts of the region, but some regions were better investigated than others. A few years earlier, researchers had noted that there was evidence of a Bronze and Iron Age mounded settlement, and it was this that the researchers were looking into in 2019. While they worked, they were approached by a local farmer. The previous winter, he'd noticed a strange rock in a nearby canal that had recently been dredged. The rock had unusual carvings on it, and he thought it would be of interest to archaeologists. The archaeologists soon realized the carvings weren't any ordinary decoration. They were an inscription in the ancient Luwian language, which was used in the Bronze and Iron Age in the area. The rock was actually a stele, and the discovery alone was significant. But when the Luwian inscriptions were deciphered, it proved to be an even more important discovery. The stele was a description of a local king defeating another kingdom in battle. The names of both combatants were exciting to the archaeologists. The victorious king was Hartapu, who was known as Hartibus. Hartapu was a mysterious figure associated with the ancient Hittite Empire. Before the stele was discovered, he'd only been attested in one other place. At a nearby volcanic cone, a monument to the ancient king had been etched into the rock. The image shows Hartapu seated, something unusual in the artwork for the time. He was believed to be connected to the Hittites in some way, but exactly how was a mystery. Now, there was a second inscription about the king, apparently defeating his enemies in battle. The stele could be dated to the 8th century BC, a period of great change in the region. It also lined up with another interesting figure. The other kingdom mentioned in the description was Phrygia, the kingdom ruled by the legendary King Midas. The kingdom had been ruled by a few people named Midas throughout its history, but in the 8th century BC, the most powerful of these was in control. This was the man who the famous legend was based upon. He greatly expanded his kingdom and power. This led to speculation that the defeated king described in the stele was actually the famous Midas. This answered some questions about the mysterious king, but there's still a lot we don't know about the Phrygia kingdom, and even its important rulers. Number 4. In August of 1977, the body of World War I veteran Everett Armstrong was found at his home in rural Indiana. The police quickly determined that someone had taken his life, but it was almost 50 years before the case was solved. Everett was 84 years old at the time of the crime, living alone in a modest mobile home in Geneva, Indiana. He had some health problems in recent months, but was still known in his community for trying to be as independent as possible. He had a small garden he tended to, and a new puppy who accompanied him on grocery trips. Everett was known for his banjo playing, and each year he competed in a local banjo strumming competition. On the afternoon of August 19, 1977, a fuel oil distributor arrived at Everett's home. Normally, the man would greet him, but this time Everett was nowhere to be seen. The screen door to his home was locked, but the distributor peered inside to see if Everett was okay. He saw the man's body lying close to the door, with his puppy standing next to him. No wounds were visible, and it was initially assumed that Everett had passed away from natural causes. A coroner removed the body but quickly realized a mistake had been made. Everett had many pellet wounds to his face and neck. The police returned to his home, which was now realized as a crime scene. There was no sign of forced entry, and nothing of value had been taken from the home. It was believed the criminal had fired a weapon through the screen door, hitting Everett at close range. They never entered the home, and the motivation for the attack was just as much a mystery as who committed the crime. Neighbors reported hearing the sound of a bullet being fired just before dusk the day before Everett's body was found, but there were no other clues. It wasn't long before witnesses came forward, though. In October of 1977, 4 people came forward, all pointing to the same individual. The man was James McBride II, a 22-year-old local man. According to witnesses, he confessed the crime to them within 24 hours, before detailed reporting had appeared in newspapers. He told them information only the police and the person responsible could have known, and even showed one witness the weapon that was used. They also reported that he was behaving erratically. But even with this information, the case went cold. In 1981, 3 people were arrested in connection to the case. Just 6 months later, the charges were dropped. It was clear that none of them had anything to do with the crime. The case again went cold. Everett had left behind 7 children and 8 siblings, who all wanted answers as to what happened to their beloved family member. But no new information could be gathered. In 2013, the Indiana State Police reopened the case. They looked again at the information that witnesses had provided and went back over the case files, hoping to find something that they might have missed before. This time, the police acted on the information provided by the witnesses, but it was still over a decade after the case was reopened that they presented their case to the Adams County prosecutor. By this time, McBride was no longer alive. He passed away at his home in 2024. According to obituaries, he asked for no funeral service. The prosecutors agreed that if he were still alive, McBride would have been charged with the crime based on the evidence provided. Number 3. In the 1700s, construction began on the building that would later become known as the Alamo. Centuries later, restoration work on the historic building ran into problems as historians tried to solve the mystery of where the original construction material came from. In March of 2025, the historic mystery was finally solved. The Alamo began life in 1718. It took 3 attempts and a few decades before the permanent building was complete. The mission complex was made from limestone with a high gypsum and clay content. By the start of the 19th century, the mission's work was complete, and it was secularized. The original limestone buildings were briefly abandoned, but it wasn't long before this frontier became the site of conflicts between various settlers and empires. For the next century, the newly christened Alamo served military purposes. It would be a significant post for the Mexican, U.S., and Texan armies during various battles. The Alamo would cement its place in history with the famous Battle of the Alamo during the Texas Revolution. Hundreds of men lost their lives, and the building was badly damaged, but reconstruction and repair work would soon begin afterward. Even after the city of San Antonio was no longer a place of conflict, there was still damage done to the now centuries-old building. The city was growing up around the Alamo. People knew the historic site needed to be protected, but just how that should be done alongside the growth of the city wasn't clear. More damage was done trying to protect the site, and by the time modern restoration work began, there was a lot to consider. Everything from humidity and moisture movement to layers of army whitewash paint had to be considered by modern restoration teams. There was a balance to be done between preserving what remained of the now 300-year-old structure and making changes to ensure it would survive another 300 years of tourists coming to the important location. One of the most important aspects that restoration teams had to consider was the material. Limestone isn't an uncommon building material, but not all limestone is the same. Restoration teams wanted to ensure that the stone used was as similar as possible to that used by the original construction team 300 years ago. Finding stone from the same quarry would be the easiest way to ensure similarities. Unfortunately, that original quarry was a mystery. Improvement works at another San Antonio tourist attraction solved that mystery. In 2024, the San Antonio Zoo broke ground on construction work for a new gorilla habitat. The habitat, Congo Falls, would allow the zoo to host gorillas for the first time in decades. But as construction teams dug into the ground beneath the zoo, they made a strange discovery. Digging work had taken place here centuries earlier. They had found the quarry. Number 2. In 2013, a French farmer working in his fields made a horrifying discovery. Buried not far beneath the surface were the skeletal remains of a man. But it didn't take investigators long to realize this wasn't the result of some recent crime. The scraps of fabric and a few metal items found on the body revealed the man had lost his life 100 years earlier. In the devastating fighting on the Western Front in World War II, there often wasn't time to retrieve the fallen or take men to a designated place to be buried. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers were buried in unmarked graves, sometimes with the location unknown even to those they were fighting alongside. In the centuries since the fighting ended, many of those graves have been discovered, and the fallen soldiers taken to dedicated cemeteries. But there are still many, many more families who don't know where their loved ones were laid to rest. It was immediately clear that the man on the French farm was one of these soldiers. An investigative team got to work trying to solve the mystery of who he was. Alongside a pocket watch and whistle, archaeologists found metal buttons that had once been part of the man's uniform. Distinctive bugles had been etched onto the buttons. This was the symbol for the Oxford and Buckinghamshire Light Infantry. Historians went through the records and found that the company had been fighting in the Battle of Arras, about 9 kilometers away from where the body was found. Multiple members of the group lost their lives in the battle, and their remains were never recovered. But historians were able to rule out most of the candidates. 9 kilometers seemed like a long way for the remains of a fallen soldier to be removed for burial. They speculated it was possible the man had been wounded and moved to a medical tent where he passed away. But even this seemed unlikely. Investigators decided instead to focus on the location to solve the mystery. The remains were found in a village, which was the scene of fighting in April of 1917. The Oxford and Buckinghamshire Light Infantry wasn't involved in this fight, but the Machine Gun Corps were. Looking at the record, historians found that a man named Osmond Bartle Wordsworth was part of this company and lost his life on April 2nd. He'd previously been part of the Oxford and Buckinghamshire Light Infantry, but had transferred out of the company in 1916. Historians believed he'd still been wearing the buttons from his old company when he was attacked while managing the weapons on the battlefield. Wordsworth was a great-great-nephew of the famous poet William Wordsworth and was a writer himself. Before the war, he'd taught the classics at Cambridge and in Canada. Even before he enlisted, Wordsworth was involved in the war. In 1915, he was sailing from Canada to England with his sister on board the Lusitania. The siblings had the misfortune of being on the ship during its final voyage when it was attacked by a German U-boat. Wordsworth gave his lifebelt to another passenger and was one of the last to leave the ship, but remarkably both he and his sister survived. Once in England, he enlisted and joined the Oxford and Buckinghamshire Light Infantry, before transferring to find a group more involved in the action. He was a second lieutenant. DNA testing confirmed that the remains found in 2013 were Wordsworth, and the mystery was officially solved. He'd already been reburied with a gravestone marked Known Unto God, but in 2022, a rededication ceremony took place to properly mark the grave of the fallen soldier. Number 1. Sutton Who is one of the most important archaeological sites in Britain. Ever since it was discovered in the 1930s, the Anglo-Saxon ship burial has been revealing more secrets of the past. It changed the way historians understood this period of history, but also revealed more historical mysteries that needed to be solved. The answer to one of these mysteries has recently been uncovered. Sutton Who refers to two Anglo-Saxon cemeteries located in Suffolk, England. It's most famous for the ship burial uncovered in 1938. A 90-foot-long ship had been dragged half a mile from the nearest river to serve as the final resting place of an important Anglo-Saxon individual. The ship was buried under a mound, along with many other precious artifacts. But the famous ship burial wasn't the only thing uncovered by archaeologists at the site. Two Anglo-Saxon cemeteries have been discovered, with the remains of important individuals buried under roughly 20 mounds. The grave goods discovered with the bodies have provided valuable insight into life in the 6th and 7th centuries. They've also provided some puzzles for archaeologists to solve. In 1986, a tractor uncovered a strange object buried in one of the fields. It was a bronze bucket, partially damaged, but still in relatively good condition, considering it had been buried for over 1,000 years. The outside of the bucket was decorated with a North African hunting scene. Lions, dogs, and a range of weaponry are depicted, as well as warriors. Archaeologists were able to determine that it dated to the 6th century and was likely made in the Byzantine Empire. An inscription in Greek reads, quote, "Use this in good health, master count for many happy years." It was likely made 100 years before it was buried. The bucket was obviously a valuable item, and archaeologists couldn't explain why it had been buried. Even as a grave good, nothing like this had been seen before. Even the original purpose of the bucket was a mystery, although historians believed it may have been used for bathing. A new discovery provided the pieces that would solve the mystery. In the years since the initial discovery, more fragments of the bucket have been discovered. During a recent dig, a block of dirt was removed and carefully analyzed. New pieces of the bucket were extracted from the dirt, including new parts of the decoration. Most importantly, archaeologists found what was inside the bucket. They discovered fragments of burned animal and human bones, as well as the remains of fabric, indicating the bones had once been in a bag. The bucket wasn't simply another grave good, it was the container for cremated remains. It was impossible for historians to tell anything about the individual from the bone fragments that were uncovered. But also contained in the vessel was a comb made from antler. It was in relatively good condition, and the archaeologists hoped that DNA from the ancient individual might still be contained within its teeth. As with many of the discoveries at the Sutton Who site, nothing like this from the Anglo-Saxon period had ever been found. The burial mixed a valuable item made in the Byzantine Empire with a typically Germanic cremation. It showed how connected the area was with the rest of the medieval world. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to hit that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But my name is Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.